Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to take this little cabinet that I found at a thrift store with oodles of paint on it, and we're going to turn it into this cute little upcycled project using IOD's new Laurel Paint Inlay and Fusion's Oakum. We started out with a good wash and a light scuff sanding before I gave it 2 coats of Fusion's Oakum paint. This piece has a lot of character with all those previous coats of paint, and I'm just going to go with it. Okay, so I have 2 coats on here, and now I'm going to use, this is the brand new Trump de lo, you know, this. It's the Laurel. So we're going to call it Laurel. IOD in their names. I think they do that just to, you know, make it complicated for us to say them. So that's the inlay I'm going to use. And I've chosen this pretty floral to go on the front. So I'm just going to cut that apart. And I don't know where I put my big scissors, so we're going to use the little bitties. And they're both the same. So if you see the top, this part is narrower than the bottom, it's wider, and I want that wider part on the bottom. So, and it's going to fit perfectly here. I'm going to try to get it as centered as I can. It's where these grid lines come in handy. So that's center. So I'm just going to mark that just to make my life a little bit easier. I'm just going to mark the dead center. And I'm going to mark the center of the cabinet. I was going to go get a measuring tape, but I'm just going to use the doors. And I'm going to eyeball it. So now if I line it up like that, let's see where the center of our image would be. We'll mark that too, just for fun. I'm going to want the whole piece, or yeah. So say 12.5 inches, so 6 1/4 will be halfway. Oh, 6 1/4. Okay. So if we line it up, why does that seem so off? Center, center. Oh, because this isn't. All right. So let's cut that a little more even. So what was throwing this off is that you can see how this, the image, the paint inlay itself is only, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch from the side on this side, but it's quite a bit larger on this side. So I'm just going to cut about that far in on this grid line. This way it's easier because I can see the line. And this isn't exact, it's just giving me a closer idea of being able to center this on the front of this little cabinet. Okay, now that should be a little bit, there we go. That doesn't seem so off now. Okay, so that being figured out, we are going to give this a coat of paint. And I'm using Fusion mineral paint in Oakum. It's one of the colors from last year's new release. Okay, just trying to kind of eyeball where I'm going to need paint. So you want a heavy enough coat so the inlay has something to set into, but you don't want it excessive, because then it's just going to be just globby, and you don't want that. But you definitely need the wet paint to be able to set your inlay into. Okay, and now, because I didn't put the paint on super thick, I'm just going to mist the paint side of my inlay with a little bit of water, a little bit on there. Probably not something that necessarily needs to happen, but that is not straight. Oh boy, it's harder to work with when you wet it. So I'm trying to work fast enough. You can readjust because the inlay is not going to activate immediately, but you don't want to shift it around too much. Or take too long to do that. Okay, so now I have my little piece of food wrap here, and I'm gonna smooth out any wrinkles. Because I don't know if you can see on camera that there are, that is setting down. There are some wrinkles, just like when you apply decoupage. And I know if you're on the IOD's membership group, the Tribe, which is the public membership group, if you're not on there, I will link it in the comments. It's a really great resource and full of ideas. And there's a lot of us stockists in that group to help when you have questions. But as I was saying, there's been a lot of questions lately regarding these wrinkles or the edges, the line that you would get. Like I've got my edges kind of sitting up here, which is fine. There's no inlay here. This blank part doesn't need to be right down. But sometimes if you set that down, you'll get this edge in your, that will make an impression in your paint. And people are struggling with that. So if you're using a product like Fusion mineral paint to apply your inlay, you would want to gently sand that
that edge out. I'll show you if we come across that. So once you have your inlay all pressed down and you've smooshed out all of those wrinkles, then I just mist it lightly with water. And now I'm going over it and I'm pushing that inlay down, and this is just a wet cloth. You can use a baby wipe. I usually give it a little spritz of water just to make sure it's wet enough. So you really want to push that inlay into your paint. So now I'm going to show you that there are some wrinkles here. Let's zoom in here and see if I can. So see, there's a wrinkle here. There's another one right here. And once this is all set up, I will show you how those transfer then into the paint. You will probably see those little wrinkles in there. There's another little one here. And I got them pretty smooth, so I'm kind of happy about that. So I don't think it's going to be super noticeable, but the best way to do it, I found, is using a balled up piece of saran wrap. You can also use something like this vinyl smoothing tool. Let's just zoom you back out. Something like this. You can use a brayer to really rub that right down into your paint. These are all options. I prefer this one. This is my go-to because it conforms into any nooks and crannies that you have on the piece. I don't always work with perfectly flat pieces. I tend to be remodeling like thrift store stuff, and even this little cabinet, like it has some texture, so it's not perfectly smooth. So the balled up food wrap works really, really well with that. So I'm going to let this dry, and then I'll be back and we'll show you how to take this inlay off. Okay, so now this is dry. And it's dry to the touch. I did not leave this overnight or anything like that. So this was not something that I had painted it originally yesterday. So the paint on the piece itself has sat overnight. I have not let the inlay dry overnight, but I think that that's fine in this case. You can leave them overnight. But when I'm working with something like Fusion, which is not a chalk style paint, I don't tend to leave them overnight. Not like I think it would be a problem. Now you want to make sure that you've dampened the paper for sure where the inlay is, but also on any parts where the paper is down, otherwise your paper will tear. So just make sure that it's good and damp everywhere where it's touching paint. Okay, let's give this a go. So I'm gently going to peel this paper up. I love how these inlays give you that kind of an antique, worn kind of look. It gives you that like an old piece of furniture that you buy, a true antique that had been hand painted. That's what the inlays remind me of. There we go. So now this you can use again, but you will have that brown paint transfer over onto your next transfer of your inlay. Okay, these are just the holes for the hardware. And then, I don't know if you can see, the inlay is kind of because I didn't take the doors off or anything, it's just kind of sitting there, which is fine. There we go. I'm just gently pushing that down in the corners, or on the free edges, I should say. I really like how that turned out. So now this has to dry, and then it has to be sealed, because don't forget this is a chalk style paint that these inlays are made out of, so you have to seal it. So we'll be back to do that. Okay, so this is all dry, and I want to show you where those wrinkles were. So remember there was kind of wrinkles in the paper here a little bit, but when you're looking at this piece, you can't, all you can see is a texture difference. If I move this and if the light catches it properly, you might be able to see that little bit of texture difference here. But there's no actual wrinkles in the paint. There's no lines in the paint from where the edges, like there's, I guess, a little one right here. But all I would do is take a little piece of sandpaper and we will even that out. So just grab a little and there you go. Super easy. So the trick to not getting those wrinkles is your food wrap. I know it sounds silly, but think of it as when you're applying decoupage and how you smooth out the wrinkles in your paper once you apply it. And before you put the top coat of your decoupage medium over the paper, you probably, a lot of you use something like food wrap to do that. Try it with your inlays, because I really think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And another thing is to try an inlay that you can take little pieces out, like with this one. There's smaller elements in this one, like these are kind of the big main ones. So these are the 4 sheets that come in this one. And this one also comes in a blue. This is the Laurel, and the other one is, I think, called Blue. I don't have it in front of me, and they're brand new. I don't remember these ones. But there's all of these smaller elements. Or talk to your stockist about getting a little sample piece to try. I know I've been giving little chunks of inlays out to people to try them, so they're not so intimidated by it, because they really are wonderful products once you get using them, once you get familiar with how they work. So now what I want to do is, this is from another sheet of the inlay, and this is these pretty little accents. I've just cut the 3, this was 1 sheet, I've cut it in 3 so that you can see each individual one. And they're all the same. And what I want to do is I want to put them together in the center here and wrap them around the edge, and then it'll go down the side like that, and I think it'll be really pretty. So the first thing I have to do is, I'm going to move this, and I'm going to cut these sheets right at the paint line right here. I'm going to cut all that excess paper off of both of them. Okay, and then I'm going to tape them together. I'm going to connect that kind of the best I can, and I'm just going to use transparent tape. And I'm not putting the tape where the paint inlay itself is. I'm just going off to the side like that. So now I've connected the two and I've made the one big long piece. Okay, so first what I have to do is measure this. Because I need center, and I need center this way. So it is 6 1/8. So we will go 3 1/16. It's a little bit hard to see my pencil lines on this color, but we got it. And that was not the way I needed to measure it. My brain is not working. I do need to measure it this way. So we've got 10 and a bit, so we're going to go 5 and a little bit. It's my technical measuring skills. So now the center of this, let's make that line a little bit there we go. So now I want that to sit here. I know where the center of my image is because I've got, that's the cut part. And the center, just going to try to line that up with center. Let's do 1/2 at a time. So I'm going to tape this . Okay, so I did the other side in kind of fast time lapse, but I'm just wanting to show you again applying the inlay. Like I said before, if you think of it as applying decoupage paper, you want to make sure you have paint everywhere. And then come at it with your little balled up piece of food wrap. And what this does, same as with decoupage, is it just helps helps with the friction, helps lessen that friction that you would normally get from your fingertips if they're even damp or anything. You don't want the friction, you don't want your paper to tear. And of course, if you're excessive and you're super aggressive with this, you can still tear your paper just like you can with decoupage paper. I do find the inlay paper is a little bit tougher, quite a bit tougher than decoupage. So not such a risk, but, and then instead of your second coat here of decoupage medium, I'm just using water. Well, you use water. It's not, this isn't just a specific to me thing, it's a how you do the inlays. So this is the major difference versus inlays and decoupage as far as your application process goes. You're using water as that step after you apply the paper. I'm just pushing this in there. The water step is what releases your paint inlay from this paper and sets it into the paint. So, important step, because this is the stage where this beautiful inlay is going to set inside your paint. Okay, so this is all dry, and again, we've got some wrinkles here. But see how I've left it, we've got it lifted on this side, but right here, it goes right to the edge. So you might see that variation, that line, where your carrier sheet actually will make a line in the paint. So we are going to see what happens with that. So we're gonna wet this again. I'm just using my mister bottle to give it a good amount here. And I just kind of want that to sit for a little bit. And then we're just going to work it in again with the wet cloth. Okay, now let's peel this up. And you can see where the wrinkles kind of were here. But that's not an actual line, it's just a variation in the texture. And I just think it adds character. And it is standing out a little bit more now because this is damp. Okay, so now that's come off. We're just going to have that hanging there, and we're going to work on the top. Let that sit for a couple seconds. I'm actually going to spray this side while that's setting. Give it a little bit of chance to do its thing. Okay, there's the one. And my tape. And I just realized as I was doing this that for some mysterious reason I have never used inlays with Fusion Paint. I don't know why. I don't remember using it with Fusion Paint any other time. I'd have to go back and look at some stuff, but I don't think I have. But I think it's working pretty good. There we go. Okay, so now this has to dry. And then we can go ahead and seal it. Okay, so this is dry, and you can really see the difference in texture, and that's what this is, because this is paint. There's no paint inlay right here. This is just the texture that the carrier sheet left on the wet paint that we put the inlay on. If that is making any sense. So what I'm going to do is I have this little tiny little sanding block, and this is a super fine side, and I am just going to go ahead on this edge, and I'm just going to smooth that out a bit. And I'm glad I chose this dark color. Like I said earlier, this is Fusion's Oakum. So it's a darker paint color, and it really shows this difference in texture a lot more than a lighter color would. So I'm just going to go ahead and smooth this out. Okay, so now, like I said earlier, I'm glad I chose a really dark paint color on here, because you can really see that texture difference. And it's all it is. It's not overspray. It's not, it's just a texture difference from the carrier sheet, because you've set it into wet paint. So there is going to be that difference. So the best thing that I have found is to either to disguise that is to do the big top and water, or clear patina and water, and spray it on. Spraying something on really makes a big difference when it comes to getting rid of that texture. So I don't know if my little... It's really important to clean these little things out when you're done, so I don't know if I cleaned this out enough, but we're going to give it a go. Oh, yeah. It's working. Okay, so all you do to help get rid of this, so this is big top and water, and give it a good spritz. And if you do this right from the get-go, you avoid smudging this as well. So now there's some random little bubbles, but those usually pop on their own. You can also use a rattle can. So this is the stuff that I use the best. It doesn't yellow. It's crystal clear. You can get it in different sheens. I usually aim for the satin. You can get this at any hardware store. And it comes in these cans, or you can get it in the quart size, which works really good for if you have your own sprayer. Or you can brush it on. But in this case, where we're trying to disguise that wrinkle and that texture difference with the carrier sheet, this works really, really well. So I'm going to dry this, and I'm going to go ahead and speed it up with this heat tool. Grab the quiet one so it's not so loud on your end. And you'll see the difference that this makes. So I'm just gonna kind of doing this in real time here so you guys can really see how this works. And I usually do 2 coats. This is how I usually seal my inlays to start with. So sometimes I get brave and I will just brush on a sealer, but for the most part, I use this spray method. And I don't know if you can see already, but it's already made a difference in that texture. And it's more of a visual texture than a physical texture even. To feel it, it's not so easy to feel that difference, but you can see it for sure, especially on a dark color. But once I get this dry, I'm going to give it another coat with the spray. When force drying with a heat gun and you're on a top coat, you want to make sure that you're moving it around a lot. You don't want to heat up one area too much because it will blister. And that's not good. Okay, so I have to let this cool a bit because I don't like putting sealer or paint or anything on something that's really warm to the touch. So we'll just let this cool, and then I'll come back and we'll give it another coat. Okay, so it's a little bit warm, but it's not hot anymore. Just make sure I mix this really well. Trying to get even spritzes here. So obviously if you can put your clear coat in a sprayer, I'm giving it a good heavy coat, but not too much that it starts running on me. Okay. Couple little bubbles again. But like I said, nothing major. Once you hit it with your heat tool, the bubbles just kind of disappear. So I'm using the big one this time. This one gets a lot hotter than the craft one that I was using earlier, so you really got to make sure you're moving it. Because it will, ooh, the door just opened, scared me. It will really blister fast. You don't have to use a heat tool. I am, just so that I can show you kind of in real time. You can actually see it. And that you don't think I'm doing something else in the background that's making things seem easier. I really want you guys to be comfortable using these paint inlays because they're pretty darn awesome. But they are a brand new product, well, about a year now, but we've never had anything like this really, so there's always going to be that little bit of a learning curve. And if you've been following me for any length of time, you know that I screw up all the time. But I always leave that in my videos because everybody messes up. And even if you've been using these products for years, you still make mistakes, things don't work out. It's just part of the process. But my thing is I always try to figure out a way to fix it. So okay, so that's pretty much dry. It still feels kind of tacky, but I'm gonna let that be and let it air dry the remainder. There's a few of these little wetter spots, and we're just gonna let that do its thing and cool down. Okay, so you can see, sort of, this is after I've given it 2 coats with the spritzer of Big Top and water, 50-50. So you can still see, like right, where's my finger? There we go. Right here, there was like a wrinkle in the carrier paper. But otherwise, they're pretty much gone. Like, if you really examine it, you're gonna see it. This isn't quite dry yet. But once this is dry, I'm going to brush over it with the clear patina again to give it, or brush over it with the clear patina to give it a more uniform, because those little spritzer bottles aren't perfect for spraying, right? But they work. So I just wanted to give you a really close up of how that looks now. And this is on a really dark color. So I'm going to go over it with a really fine grit sandpaper. You could use even a magic eraser, something like that. And to smooth it out if there's any little bits of, like little dust bits or something like that. And clean it up really good, and then you'll be good to go. So no wrinkles. Okay, so I've given this one more sand, and now I am going to give it a last coat with the clear patina. And we've got 2 coats of Big Top and water on here to seal in that inlay. And now this coat of clear patina. And I'm just going to brush it on. I've also gone ahead and, maybe you'll be able to see it better here. I've gone and distressed the edges of this a little bit. I like stuff that's a little bit distressed, so I usually distress it in one way, shape, or form. And this one, like I said earlier, has some texture to it with all the different coats of paint it already had on it when I got it. So the distressing just matches. It just goes with the flow here. And I just kind of brush it on, not necessarily in any particular way, but then I go over it at the end in the direction I want the brush strokes to kind of go. You kind of have to work fairly quickly with this stage because you don't want it to dry as you're working with it, because like I mentioned earlier, then you end up with pretty distinct brush strokes. Which I don't mind a little bit, but I don't want too much. And remember, this is going on kind of milky, but it dries clear. Oh, and I put the handles on, which I realize now is a little ahead of the game, but I should have waited. I don't know why I didn't wait. When I'm waiting for something to dry or something like that, I end up just keeping on working, making things complicated. Because now I have to paint around these little knobs. These are the original little knobs that it had on it. I just cleaned them really good. I scrubbed them. And I didn't paint them or anything. The color that they are originally kind of goes with what I want happening here. All right, and we'll let this dry, and that is it.
So in closing, I would like to say that to avoid the dreaded wrinkles or lines, which are the impression of the carrier sheet setting into that wet paint as you apply the inlay, is to spray your clear coat on. So if you're using the Big Top and water to set it like I did, just do a couple coats with that, and then you can go ahead and use an actual rattle can that you can get at the hardware store. Just make sure you're going with a water-based sealer. There's something different about the spray technique versus the brush-on technique that really disguises those texture variations in your paint. I really hope this video helps you to understand the paint inlays a little bit better and gives you the courage to get out and give one a try, or to maybe try again. I think you'll really love them once you get the hang of them. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you join me on the next video.